So, if you have a student who is struggling to behave safely in all these school environments, here's a series of steps you can follow to implement a social story intervention. So, the first step, like we do with anything, we need to identify the goal. We need to identify the behavior that the teacher would like the student to change. If the student on the playground is consistently standing on benches and jumping off them or doing something else unsafe, we need to first clearly identify and describe what behavior we would like the student to change before we do anything else. Once we've done that, we can move on to step number 2, which is to define the desired behavior. So in the case of standing on the benches, the desired behavior would be for the student to keep 2 feet safely on the ground in an appropriate manner that allows him to be safe, him or her to be safe while playing with other students on the playground. Then we need to gather baseline data. So we need a teacher to observe the student at recess and note how often the student jumps onto the bench and then jumps off. Whatever the initial behavior is, we need to gather some baseline data so we know how frequent this behavior is. Then once we've gathered all that, we need to do step number 4, which is to actually write the social story. And so when we write the social story, again, keeping in mind what we talked about a couple slides earlier, number 3, we need that format to be tailored to the needs of the audience, which is the student. So we need to keep in mind their interests, their attention span, what the behavior is we're trying to encourage them to carry out. So as we're writing number 4, we need to keep those things in mind because, again, a social story needs to be personalized for the student in which it's written. And we don't want to just find a cookie cutter story to implement. And then 5, we need to actually implement the social story. And so a lot of times, the most common way that this is carried out is once the social story is written, the teacher will pull the student aside and maybe 5 or 10 minutes before recess begins, the teacher will read the social story with the student or have the student themselves read the social story to themselves. This will give the students a fresh idea in their mind of what appropriate behavior is on the playground and what they can do to be safe while they're on the playground. Again, it's not going to direct them to not jump on the bench. It's simply going to describe what appropriate behavior looks like. And if appropriate behavior means not jumping on benches, then that means that the students will have a clear idea of what appropriate behavior looks like. And then number 6, once this has been implemented, and again, going back to number 5, once you read it to the student, it may depend on how quickly the student responds. You may have to read it every single day to start out before recess. Then you may taper it back to 3 days a week, then maybe just once a week before recess. And then after a while, if you see enough growth by tracking it with step number 6, you may not have to read it to the student at all, or maybe just once every few weeks or once a month, depending on how the student responds. But it does not have to be every single day. Again, it needs to be personalized to what that student needs. And so that can look different for every student. So here's an example I found that describes safe behavior. And again, like I said, this is just to give you an example of what a social story can look like. This is not tailored specifically to a student. This is more of a general idea, so you can see kind of the overall idea of what a good social story looks like. Okay, so this is called Safety Wherever I Go. Wherever I go, there is something or someone to help keep children safe. Wherever I